Chapter 8. Why are there only 98? She said. I thought we counted 99. Henry cocked his head and scrunched his lips. I think the door with the compass locks doesn't have a number. Henrietta leaned closer. What does it say by the numbers? Does it tell you how to get through? I don't think so, Henry said. But what does it say? About which one? There's 98 of them. How about the mailbox? Henry looked around the diagram and found a little rectangle about where he thought the mailbox was. It had the number 77 written on it. He looked over to the other page and found 77. Beside the number were 3 words with slashes between them. Post / Byzanthemum / win ? Henry read. I don't know what that means, Henrietta said. Do you? Post means mail. Byzanthemum is a place. It was in one of the letters. He looked up at her. I left the letters on my bed. I'll get them, Henrietta said. Henry could hear her running up the attic stairs while he looked over Grandfather's diagram. She was breathing loudly when she stepped back into the room with the letters in her hand. The crazy handwritten letter is addressed to the master of the 77th box, she said. Read what it says for the black cupboard. Instead, Henry looked at the one above the mailbox, the door that had rained on his bed. Its number was 56. Beside 56 on the other page were the words Commonwealth / Badon Hill / same. Henry put out his hand and Henrietta gave him the 2 letters. The top of the typed one said it had been delivered by the Island Hill of Badon Chapter. He shivered. Someone must have dropped the letter onto his bed from the other side while he was sleeping. What's the black cupboard? Henrietta asked. Henry found it on the bottom row. Or, he thought he did. He couldn't be quite sure how many in from the end it was. Then he looked back at the list of numbers and found number 8. Indoor, he said. That's all it says, and it doesn't sound nice at all. It doesn't have to sound nice, Henrietta said. Just exciting. What do you think it means? I think it's a place. Badon Hill is a place. It's where the worms came from in the rain in the second letter. Indoor's a place. They're all places on the other side of the cupboards. Do you think we can get through? No. Why not? We're too big. Henrietta thought about this for a moment. There has to be a way we can shrink. I don't think so. What about the other cupboard? Henrietta asked. What did it say again? It says post / Byzanthemum / win ? The Byzanthemum part sounds like a flower, she said. It would be nice if it was a flower place. It's a post office. But what about outside the post office? If you went to the post office, you could go outside, and then where would you be? Henry had not thought of this. His mind had grasped, as far as it could grasp such a thing, that the cupboards in his room led to different places. But he had thought of those places like anyone else would think of a secret room in a house. He had only gotten as far as thinking of Badon Hill as a place with trees and Byzanthemum as a yellow post office. It had not even crossed his mind that these places could in turn lead to other places, which might lead to other places and to other places, as many places as there were stars or people or breaths in the wind. Do you think these might be whole different worlds? He asked. Henrietta didn't blink at the question. I thought about that, she said. Some of them might be, but I don't think so. Why not? They just seem very here. Oh, Henry said. Henrietta was reading over his shoulder. Look, she said, and pointed. This one says Arizona. I've been to Arizona, and that's not in a different world. Henry looked. She was right. Arizona was written beside the number 17. Which one is it? Henry asked, and they both scanned at the diagram for the number 17. They found it 4 up from the bottom on the left side. Then they read through the list for any other names they recognized. The rest of the words meant very little to them. Axum reminded Henry of something, but he didn't know what. When they'd read through the list, Henry closed the journal and sat on his grandfather's bed. What's wrong? Henrietta asked. She sat beside him and took the books out of his hands. She turned to the first page. Henry sighed. I don't think we should be doing this. You sound like Penelope, Henrietta said. Listen to me, Henry said. Somebody, probably Grandfather, hid these cupboards. I don't think they're very nice, especially not the black one. We should either tell your dad everything and let him figure out the cupboards, or just leave the key to the room somewhere where he can find it. You're scared, Henrietta said. She wasn't looking at him. So, we've gotten 2 letters so far, and neither of them was very nice. Whimpering child, Henrietta said. Don't worry, it's not that bad. It's normal for little kids to be scared. Henry glared at her. I'm older and bigger than you are. Henrietta laughed and put her chin in the air. I'm not scared. Oh, come on, Henry snorted. You were scared to come in this room. That's different, she said, and I still didn't chicken out. I came in, and I even think somebody's been living in here. Henry didn't say anything, so she kept going. I'm sure you can be as brave as a girl who is younger and smaller than you are if you try. Let's just find out a little more about the cupboards, and then we'll decide whether or not to tell Dad, okay? She grinned at him. Fine, Henry said. He couldn't have said anything else. Henrietta looked down at the bed and around the room. But let's not stay in here, she said. Let's go up to your room. Henry grabbed the letters, and the 2 of them stood up and walked to the door. Henrietta was carrying the journal. Henry took the key out of the door and put it in his pocket. He pulled the edge of the door, let it swing as close to the jamb as it would go, then stuck his finger in the hole where the knob would have been, and shut the door the rest of the way. Lock it so it doesn't swing open, Henrietta said. Henry pushed on the door. It didn't move. It's already locked, he said, and the 2 of them, trying not to glance back, ran up the stairs to Henry's room and flopped onto his still damp bed. For a long time they matched numbers and names to the cupboards on Henry's wall. When they started to lose track, Henrietta wrote the name and number of each cupboard on little pieces of paper that she cut out from one of her old school notebooks. Then she taped them to the doors, always careful to avoid stepping in Henry's little accident. When they were about halfway done, she bounced back onto Henry's bed and announced that she was tired of taping. I can tape for a bit, Henry said. No, Henrietta said, that's not what I meant. I want to be done looking at the cupboards now. I want to go through one. Well, we can't. I'm sure there's a way. Why else would Grandfather keep all of them? He plastered them shut. Henrietta wasn't listening. I wish we could see through the dark one. You could reach through, though. Yeah. Henry was flipping through the pages of the journal. Most of it looked disappointing, just a bunch of stuff neither of them understood about wood grains and wind, and lots of drawings and descriptions of the house. Beyond the 2 pages dedicated to the cupboards, they found nothing helpful. I'm going to reach through, she said, and sat up. Henry tried to ignore her. He knew she would go straight to the black door, so he just kept turning pages and staring blankly at the old handwriting. She surprised him by going to the Baden Hill door first. She didn't ask for help with the stiff latch, and eventually it slid beneath her weight. The door opened, and even though he wasn't looking, Henry smelled the pleasant change in the room. Henrietta did too. I wish my bedroom could smell like that, she said, and breathed deeply with her face in the door. Then she poked her hand through and began feeling around. Henry knew that she was feeling the same things he had, soft, almost damp earth and moss. She held quite still for a moment before she pulled her hand back. She smiled at Henry. I could feel the sun, she said, and turned back toward the cupboard. I think I know how we could see through. How? Henry said. He was looking now. It's not dark on the other side, Henrietta said. For some reason the light just doesn't come through. I think we need a periscope. Henry laughed. A periscope? He asked. Where are we going to get one? I have one in the barn. Mom and Dad gave it to me for my last birthday. Dad made it. I'll be right back. She left Henry by himself sitting on the bed. He was looking at the door to Baden Hill. Soon he was feeling around the inside again. He pulled some crumbling wood and a beetle back through, and then reached in again as far as he could. There was no top, just rough, rotting sides and an earthy bottom. Suddenly he felt sunlight on the back of his hand and fingers. He sat back and thought, a periscope might work. Henry looked down at the black door. If it did work, then Henrietta would want to look through that one, and he would be sick again. The green towel still marked the spot of his first embarrassment. He pushed the towel with his toe. Then he bent over, rubbed the floor with it, stood up, and hurried downstairs, breathing through his mouth. In the kitchen, he rinsed the towel off in the sink and then climbed back up to the attic with fistfuls of paper towels. When he finished cleaning up, at least by a boy's standards, he went down to the second-floor bathroom and plugged the toilet, trying to flush everything at once. He watched the toilet burble and stew until he heard Henrietta coming up. He looked at the toilet again, mentally shrugged, and went back to his stairs. When he reached his doorway, Henrietta was already trying to wiggle her periscope through the door to Baden Hill. She was having some trouble, but it finally slid through, pointing up at a very slight angle. She laughed out loud and clapped her hands. "Turn off the light, Henry. I want to see if there's anything shining through before I look." Henry slid between the wall and the bed and over to the lamp, but he didn't turn it off. "Which way is it pointing?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is your periscope looking up at the sky, down at the ground, or sideways? It won't look straight out." Henry looked at him blankly. "Why not?" "I think it must be pointing down." Henry was right. Frank had made the periscope out of PVC pipe and old motorcycle mirrors. A viewing box was attached to the bottom, and Henrietta had it pointing up so she could look down into it. The length of pipe ran into the cupboard, and on the other end, where Henrietta and Henry couldn't see, was a box pointing in the opposite direction from the first one, almost straight down at the ground. Henrietta bent over the view box and looked. "I can see," she said. "It's all green." "It's probably grass," Henry said. Henry sat back up. "So how do we look out?" she asked. "Well," Henry said, "we'll probably have to take the box off the other end." "You mean break it?" "No, I mean take it off so we can look straight out. We can always put it back on." Henrietta wriggled the pipe back through the cupboard and handed it to Henry. "Be careful, I don't want Dad to think I broke it." "He wouldn't notice anyway." Henry gripped the pipe and pulled at the box on the top. He tugged and twisted until it came off in his hand. "He didn't glue it," Henry said. "It'll go back on easy." This time Henry tried to shove the pipe through the cupboard, but he was just fumbled with it. Finally, Henrietta took it and fed it through. "Now turn off the light," she said. Henry did, and then he shut his two doors. He and Henrietta both caught their breath. A solid beam of sunlight shone up through the view box, through the wandering dust in the air, and eventually arriving in a bright spot on Henry's ceiling. "There's light," Henrietta managed. "Look through," Henry said. Henrietta leaned slowly over the view box, blinked a bit, and then looked. After a moment she pulled away from the box. Her eyes were watering. "What did you see?" Henry asked. "Some grass and tall trees and the sky, and then I looked right at the sun by accident. And a big rock. Let's put the box on. I want to look at the sides." "Let me look first." What Henry saw was green and upside down. He saw tall grass blowing gently around the end of the pipe. Beyond that was the gray, mossy-topped surface of what seemed to be a large stone. Even farther were the tops of some very tall trees. Henry pushed his end of the periscope down as far as it would go, and the view climbed higher. There were leaves on the tops of trees, but mostly a very blue sky, and in that blue sky was a single cloud. He lifted the view box and tried to make out the stone. It was not long before he recognized it. And it was after he recognized it that he saw what looked like bones perched against the left end of the stone. A skull, almost nose up, was leaning against the gray wall of the rock. Moss-flecked yellow and ivory spread beneath it. Henry couldn't see it well, but he could make out the long snout, part of an eye socket, and one row of upper teeth with big canines. His first thought was wolf, then dog, and finally black dog. Henry sat up quickly. He had forgotten most of his dream, but the thought of the black dog brought it all pouring back. All the images of his climb, the trees, and the stone scurried through his mind. "We're in the crack of an old tree," he said. "What?" Henrietta asked. "What do you mean?" "I dreamed this place," Henry said, and he described it all for her from the beginning to the end. "We're looking out from the crack of the old tree where the big black dog was scratching." Henrietta sat still for a moment, silent. Henry sat still, wondering what to look, what to think. "Let's look in the inn door," Henrietta asked. "What?" "The black door. Let's look through that one now. Henry shook his head. I don't want to. I'll be sick again. No, you won't, Henrietta said. You didn't dream anything bad about that door, did you? Oh, we should clean up where you threw up. I don't want to slip on the towel in the dark. I already did, Henry said, when you were in the barn, but I plugged the toilet with paper towels. Did it overflow? Not while I was in there. Henrietta laughed. You just left it? Yeah. There's a plunger right beside the toilet. Let's look through the black door. I don't want to. Well, then go sit out in the attic and I'll look. Henrietta slid toward the wall. Or go down and plunge the toilet. You're being worse than Penny. She's never curious. Henry stood up. He didn't say anything. Everything he wanted to say would sound childish. He knew he was afraid of the black door, and he thought that he should be, but he was embarrassed that he had thrown up, and Henrietta made him feel stupid. So he opened his bedroom doors, stepped out with only slightly offended grunt, and went to plunge the toilet. He shut the doors behind him, hoping that Henrietta might feel a little afraid in the dark. Henry had never used a plunger before. Of course, there wasn't much that he had used before. He had read about various devices and implements in boring books that his father had given him for his birthdays and Christmas, so he knew about the float mechanism in the toilet tank, about water filtration and anti-lock brakes. He had read nothing about plungers. The plunger he was using was confusing him. The rubber part was black and somehow kept turning inside out. But Henry wasn't thinking too much about it, and when, after he had slopped it around the toilet bowl a bit, he reached over and flushed the toilet, he hardly noticed how close to overflowing the water came. He was irritated with Henrietta and with himself. Why did he have to throw up just because he was scared? And pass out? And he was angry with Henrietta because she was being stupid. The door was obviously not a good door. More than that, he was angry with himself for leaving her alone to look through a door he was sure was bad. He should not have let her. He was bigger than she was. Suddenly, all the water in the toilet gurgled and slurped its way down. Henry glanced at the toilet, wondered where all the water had gone, then flushed it again. Without watching to see what would happen, he stuck the plunger back into its holder beside the toilet and headed upstairs. He was preoccupied, collecting the words he would use to explain things to Henrietta, when his hand touched one of his doors. It was cold. He pulled the doors open quickly and stepped forward into the dark room. His bed was in the way. Henrietta, he said. Cold in the room sucked at him. His skin tightened and sent up bumps. His stomach knotted and burbled into his throat while his legs tried to collapse. He jumped onto the bed and lunged for his lamp. He knocked it over but still found the small switch and pushed it. Henrietta was lying on her face between the bed and the wall. Her left arm was up to the shoulder in the black cupboard. Ignoring the pit of nausea in his stomach, Henry jumped to the floor, grabbed her shoulders, and tried to pull her away from the wall. She wouldn't budge. On all fours above Henrietta, he leaned down and reached into the cupboard. He swallowed a gag and moved his hand along the chilled skin of her arm. He knew when his hand had passed out of the cupboard because Henrietta's arm went from cold to frozen. His fingers crawled down her arm until they felt a hand gripping her wrist, clenched tight. In a split second, the hand let go of Henrietta and grabbed Henry. Henry yelled, tried to jump, and bent his elbow in the wrong direction in the cupboard. He twisted his hand hard and pulled back. He was jerked against the wall, his head slamming against the knob of another cupboard. Loud words he did not understand poured out of the cupboard's mouth, and the cold grew stronger. Henry writhed, lungs full but not exhaling, teeth grinding, body flopping and pulling. Even while he fought, he felt sickness growing inside him, welling into his chest. He felt the fingers on his wrist slip and quickly reclamp farther up around his forearm and his shirt sleeve. He pulled both knees up on the wall and pulled back. His sleeve, gripped tight, slid down around his wrist. Henry didn't think about what he did. He had done it before on the playground. He had been made fun of then. He slithered his hand back inside his sleeve. The other hand gripped and regripped, but Henry was shedding his shirt quickly now. When his arm came free into the body of his shirt, he ducked his head down and pulled it out. The whole shirt disappeared into the cupboard, and he fell back onto the floor. Then, before he could pull her hand from the door, Henrietta's body slid closer to the wall. Henry turned, leaned across his bed, and grabbed his floppy-bladed knife on the nightstand. This time, when he dropped to the floor beside Henrietta, he gripped Henrietta's shoulder with his right hand, while his left, with thumb firmly holding the knife open, slid down her arm. When he thought he was almost to the back of the cupboard, he stopped and took a deep breath. Then he lunged straight through with the knife. The blade bit into something hard like bone, but slipped and folded shut on his own fingers. On the other side of the cupboard something shrieked. Henry felt Henrietta's arm go limp. He dropped the knife, yanked his hand back, and rolled Henrietta away from the wall. Then he grabbed the black door, shook the golden chain back in, and slapped the door in place. He kicked it tight and sat still with both of his feet against it, breathing heavily. Henrietta wasn't stirring. Henry looked at his fingers. 3 of them were leaking blood onto the floor. He shivered, noticing again how cold the room was, especially without his shirt. He wanted to check on Henrietta. Instead, he sat for a very long time with his feet against the door to indoor. When he thought enough time had passed that he was sure whoever it was couldn't get the door open from the other side, or wasn't going to try, he scooted over to Henrietta. She was almost snoring. He shook her a little. "Henrietta," he said. She turned her head but didn't wake. "Henrietta," he said again, and shook her harder. He glanced up. Blake the cat was sitting on the bed looking at him. His white body was motionless. His ears were up and his gray tail twitched. Henry stared back. "Did you see that?" Henry asked. The cat looked at the black door, then jumped down to lick Henrietta's face with his sandpaper tongue. She opened her eyes and tried to sit up. Henry helped her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Henrietta yawned. "Where's your shirt?" "It went through the black cupboard, so I guess it's an indoor, if that's its name." "You shoved it through the cupboard?" "No. What happened to your hand?" "Do you remember anything?" Henry asked. "You plugged the toilet. After that." "Oh." Henrietta furrowed her brow and looked around the room. "I looked through the black cupboard." "And?" "And the flashlight fell through." "The flashlight? You were using a flashlight?" "I taped it onto a yardstick and stuck it through next to the periscope." "Are you stupid?" Henrietta gave him a hard look. "That's not nice." "You are! You're stupid!" Henry stood up and turned around in place. He pointed at her. "You're really, really dumb. Why would you do that?" "Let me think," Henrietta said, glaring. "Oh, right. It was dark on the other side, and I wanted to see. Isn't that why people use flashlights?" Henry couldn't stop moving. "And so you just stuck one into some strange evil place and it fell through?" "Yes, I did. Because I didn't run away scared like you. I might be a girl, but you act more like one than I do." Henry grunted. "And it was my favorite," Henrietta said. "So when it fell, I reached in to see if I could find it. Do you think we could fish it back through?" "No!" Henry yelled. "No, no, no!" He jumped. "No! You don't remember being grabbed? When I came upstairs, you were unconscious, up to your shoulder, in the cupboard, face down on the floor. Someone was pulling you, and I had to reach in and stab them with my knife. No!" Henrietta smiled and put her eyebrows up. "Really?" she said. "Well, if there is someone on the other side, it's not like they could do anything from in there. It's just a cut on your hand." Now Henry was truly furious. He kicked the wall. He kicked the bed. He looked for something to throw. The cat sat by Henrietta and watched all of it. Henry almost said a lot of things, but his mouth and mind couldn't find them at the same time. He couldn't speak until he finally slowed down and stood, breathing heavily. "You're not allowed in my room," he said. "You're not allowed to look at my cupboards. You're not allowed to open them or talk to me about them. You are not allowed." "It's not like I could open them if I'm not in your room," Henrietta said. She stood up and picked up the cat. "I think you're being silly," she said. He knelt on Henry's bed and waddled across it to the doors. Without another word, she walked out of Henry's bedroom and down the stairs. Henry flopped onto his bed, and his steam leaked slowly out. He began telling himself a story in his head. It was about how just and kind and understanding he was. It was about how right he had been, how necessary his tone and word choice. It was about a girl who just didn't understand, who was completely ignorant. Then, for some reason, the narrator of the story included an incident in which Henry had pushed an envelope into a strange place just to see what would happen. It hadn't even been an accident. The incident did not fit with the rest of the story, so Henry tried to ignore it. He couldn't ignore it, so he tried to explain it. Completely different things. The post office was obviously not dangerous. It was yellow. I just wanted to see what the mailman would do. The flashlight was stupid. I didn't shine a flashlight into the post office. She didn't even act sorry. I would have acted sorry. I always act sorry when people get upset. She didn't even care that I probably saved her life. She didn't know. She was unconscious. Oh, shut up. Henry got to his feet and found a new shirt and told himself to forget about it. When he walked downstairs, he made himself whistle. Henrietta was sitting at the dining room table eating a sandwich. "Yours is in the fridge," she told him. "Thanks," Henry said, and went to find it. "Want a drink?" he asked from the kitchen. "Sure." Henry came back out and sat down with his sandwich and 2 milks. "I'm sorry I was stupid," Henrietta said. She reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but she didn't look at him. "I'm sorry I said you were stupid," Henry replied. "I didn't mean to knock the flashlight in." Henrietta's voice was quiet. Henry took a bite. "It was dumb to even have it." "I said I was sorry," Henrietta muttered. "You would have done it too if you hadn't been afraid." Henry began to get angry and stopped himself. "It would have been just as stupid if I'd done it." "And you would have," Henrietta said, finally looking at him. Henry sniffed and smoked slowly. "I did not want to look in the black cupboard." Henrietta stared back down at her plate. "But if you had wanted to, you would have used a flashlight." "But I wouldn't have shoved it through," Henry said. Both of them continued eating. "I'm sorry I was stupid," Henrietta said again. Henry took a deep breath. "I'm sorry I got mad and said you were stupid." Henrietta pointed. "You should wash the blood off your hand. It's kind of gross, eating like that." Henry shrugged. He hadn't washed for 2 reasons. First, because his fingers didn't hurt that much, and he thought that washing them might. Second, because he felt about 10 years older every time he saw his bloody hand. "We can finish putting all the names on the doors after lunch," Henrietta said. "No," Henry said. Henrietta looked at him. "What do you mean? I said I was sorry." Henry stared at his sandwich. "I know, but I still don't want to do this. I don't want something bad to happen. We're not going to try and open any more." "But I haven't even seen the post office yet," Henrietta said. "And what about Baden Hill? Those are both good places." Henry thought about this. "Okay," he said. "Tonight you can come to my room and look in the yellow chrysanthemum place, but not till tonight, and I'm in charge." He looked at her. "You have to do what I say, even if you don't want to." It was Henrietta's turn to think. "Okay," she said. "Good," Henry said into his glass. He took a long drink and thumped it back onto the table. "Don't ever open the black cupboard again." Henrietta didn't say anything.